Hey there, Buzzed Hair. In this video, we're going to talk about what is a proper hair transplant design and what should be the end goal of a good hair transplant. Remember, if you're still in those early stages of hair loss, you've only started to lose a little bit, it's not time to have a hair transplant yet. The first thing you should do is try that 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, Finasteride or Dutasteride, and use Minoxidil for at least 6 months to see if you can stop your hair loss and possibly recover some. If you've progressed beyond that point, then we're going to talk about what's a proper and good hair transplant design so that you know how to choose a good clinic. So in my opinion, a good hair transplant outcome is dependent on two main elements. Number one, math. And number two, the element of design artistry. Number one, the math. How many grafts need to be moved from the back and sides of the head to the top and the front to produce a outcome with sufficient density that can blend in with your existing hair and be styled, versus how many grafts do you have available on your head. And then the element of the design and the shape. So the hairline area, is it shaped well? Are the hairs laying at a proper angle? And is the hairline placed at an age appropriate location? How those two elements are approached in a hair transplant are gonna depend on how much hair loss has occurred on your head. So where you are on the Norwood scale from 1 to 7, your age, and your personal goals. So all those things play a role in determining how those two elements are approached. First, I want to talk about the donor area, right? The middle of the back of the hair and a little bit onto the sides is the proper area for extraction. That's the strongest DHT resistant hairs that even in men who experience hair loss genetically will hold on to those hairs on the back and the sides for most of their lifetime. So when those hairs are transplanted to the new areas on the top and the front of the head, they will continue growing for most of a life. The donor area management depends on the type of hair transplant that's being done. So for an FUT, where they take the strip out, they want to take that strip from the middle of the back of the head across it, a little bit onto the sides of the head possibly, and they're using all the hairs from that strip that they remove. So that's the thickest area of donor hair, and then that wound is going to be closed back up. Ideally it will heal smoothly and it'll just leave a line scar on the skin itself that can be covered up with hair. There shouldn't be any major break in the hair, so that when you grow your hair out to a little bit of length, basically covers up the strip scar. For the FUE procedure, the individual graft extractions, the area of extraction should stretch widely across the back of the head and a little bit onto the sides. The graft should be extracted as uniformly as possible to avoid any major thinning. One example of bad FUE donor management would be extracting only from a square or rectangular shaped area on the back and not utilizing the entire curved area of the back and sides. That is not proper donor management. Another bad FUE donor management example would be extracting far too many grafts from too small of an area on the back, which can just lead to over harvesting and shock loss as well. So that area is going to end up looking a lot thinner and weaker than the surrounding areas. That's bad donor management. So now let's talk about the recipient area, the other part of the hair transplant where the hair goes. This is the most important factor in the end result. How the design of the recipient area is approached is dependent on your hair loss severity, so where you are on the Norwood scale from 1 to 7. If you are between, say, like a Norwood 1 to like a Norwood 3, maybe Norwood 4, so you're in those minor to moderate stages of hair loss, you have the luxury of being able to be a little bit more aggressive with the hairline placement. You might be able to bring it a little bit lower. If you're a Norwood 5, 6, or 7, you've lost a lot of hair, you're probably gonna have to be more conservative with how aggressive you are, because you only have a limited amount of hair and you have to maximize that density as much as you can. The hairline location itself can vary. Obviously, it should be customized to every individual, but one thing it should be for sure is above the forehead muscles, okay? So when you flex those forehead muscles, your hairline should be above them. It should not be down into them at all. If we talk about actual measurements, usually about 7 centimeters above the midpoint of the eyebrows, about 7 centimeters up, that should be around where the hairline should be placed. If you get too low, it starts to look too youthful, too unnatural for your age. After I had my first hair transplant done, my hairline was placed at about 7 3/4 centimeters above my eyebrows. And then in my second and third procedures, when the hairline was lowered slightly, we got it down to about 7 centimeters. Now, if you only have very minor hair loss and you're going to have a hair transplant, like I said, you might be able to be more aggressive with the hairline. You can go a little bit lower than 7 centimeters if it looks proper on your face, okay? But you don't want to be going so low that it just looks way too youthful for an adult. The hairline should also be convex shaped, slightly convex shaped, okay? It shouldn't be concave. It shouldn't curve down. Concave is a very youthful looking hairline shape and a very feminine hairline shape. So women who have hair transplants, they should have the slightly concave hairline shape. But if you're a man, you should have the convex hairline shape, a little bit curving up towards the temple areas. Another common hairline shape that I see, they do a very flat and straight hairline just straight across the forehead. In my opinion, it just looks too unnatural. You look like a Lego character. You look like you were drawn as a cartoon character. A more natural, realistic hairline has that just slight curve upward. The hairline also must meet the temples with no gaps. Okay, so you want to be meeting those side temples with no gaps. The edge of the hairline itself can be straight or it can be slightly jagged or irregular. I've seen clinics and doctors approach the hairline edge a little bit differently. It can be straight or it can be slightly irregular. I prefer just slightly irregular. The major thing to note in the hairline area is that only single hair grafts should be used to make a nice, soft, natural start to the hair, not the multi-grafts. The multi-grafts should be avoided in the hairline. Now let's talk about the mid-scalp area, so behind the hairline. This is if you're getting a hair transplant that's going deeper onto your scalp. The mid-scalp approach design strategy, it's going to vary with the individual's hair characteristics, color, texture of the hair, those sorts of things, because a lot of times with lower contrast, if you say have light hair, it might be easier to achieve a fuller look with fewer hairs. If you have really dark hair against light skin, you're probably going to need more hair in the mid-scalp area to achieve a full look. Actual mathematical density, usually between 35 and 50 grafts per square centimeter. That's the goal of a decent density hair transplant outcome, okay? So that equates to about 50% of your original youthful hair density. Around 50% of your original youthful hair density, that's gonna be enough to look full in most cases. The angle of the hairs in the hairline area should be between 10 and 20 degrees up above the skin. Hair angle should be between 30 and 40 degrees in the mid-scalp, okay? So it should lay a little bit flatter near the hairline, a little bit more upwards in the mid-scalp area. Most important thing is that it matches your surrounding hair as much as possible. So if you have existing hair on the top of your head still, the transplanted hair needs to mirror that as much as possible. And the transplanted hair should continue backwards as far as your desired area to cover is. So when we talk about the crown area, this is really only relevant for people who have the number of grafts to even cover some of that area to begin with, okay? Because if you're limited, if you've had a lot of hair loss, the most important areas to get covered are the frontal and the mid-scalp regions from the hairline back to, like, say, the upper crown. The crown area should only be approached if you have a lot of grafts to use and you want to try to cover that area a little bit as well. The crown is like called the black hole of the hair transplant area. So it uses up so many grafts to get the crown to look thick. So in most cases, people are gonna have to sacrifice the crown density. The most important thing to get right is that frontal profile look. So you're gonna wanna focus on the hairline and the mid-scalp region first. If you do get your crown approached in a hair transplant, you wanna make sure that they're gonna recreate that natural swirl pattern, okay? So usually clockwise in most people, but it should match your existing hair if you still have it back there. And the density in the crown is almost always gonna be lower than on the rest of your head, just due to the math of most people don't have enough hair grafts to cover the whole crown as it was in original youth. Now let's talk about implantation pattern, the placement of the hair grafts themselves. Some doctors implant the grafts in like these perfect rows. Everyone is equidistant from the rest, and they're like in perfect rows when they implant. I'm not a fan of this. It's not a ideal hair transplant implantation pattern because it doesn't match your natural hair pattern. Natural hair grafts are just kind of randomly spread out across the head. They are not occurring in perfect rows. So those doctors who do implant in perfect rows, I have a feeling that they just do it because it helps them stay on track more. They might be able to work faster that way. It might be easier for them to count the grafts. But in my opinion, it's a little bit lackluster just because, like I said, it doesn't match the natural hair on your head, and that should be the goal of a hair transplant. I've seen cases where the row implanting can turn out okay, especially if the density is thick enough. When it grows out, you may not be able to even much notice the fact that they were implanted in rows. But it's not ideal. The analogy that I've heard a lot is that, imagine you're looking at a cornfield where all the corn stalks are in perfect rows and there's, you know, an equal amount of space between every cornstalk, you're going to be able to see straight through in between the gaps. You'd rather it be randomized across the area so that you have hairs blocking the gaps. So the row implantation is not ideal and it should be avoided where possible. Now let's talk about the temple areas. So temples aren't always addressed in hair transplants. In fact, in most they're probably not, but a lot of people who are, you know, experiencing that temple recession might want to get their temples reinforced in a hair transplant. So in the temple areas, only soft and lighter hairs and single grafts should be used, and they should be implanted at the proper sweeping angle. So they should sort of angle backwards towards the back of the head, and then they should curve downwards as you go down the temples like this. That's very important to get that hair angle low and sweeping back and then downward. Any hair transplant doctor or clinic that you go to should fully understand your head and your situation and customize the approach to you and your goals, okay? They shouldn't proceed with just a cookie cutter approach on every hair transplant patient that comes into the clinic. You'll see those a lot with the hairlines, just standard cookie cutter flat hairlines with everybody who goes there. That should be avoided where possible. You want to go to somebody who's going to spend at least a little bit amount of time studying your head, your hair loss pattern, understanding how it might progress in the future, and customizing the goals to what you want and what the hair transplant doctor knows to be good outcome. Some of the most common errors that I see in hair transplant clinics around the world include improper or reckless extraction area. Like I talked about earlier, that square or rectangular shaped extraction area on the back in the donor, and taking too many grafts out of the donor area at once, which is going to lead to overharvesting. A quality hair transplant clinic is going to have a experienced doctor, lead doctor, who is extracting from the donor area or correctly drawing the extraction area for trained technicians to extract from. If you have just technicians deciding where to extract from on their own without the supervision of a doctor, that's going to usually lead to a lot of problems. So you want to make sure you have a lead, experienced doctor who's identifying, studying the donor area properly, and identifying the area of extraction correctly for the technicians to follow. The other very typical error that I see in bad hair transplants is a hairline that's placed way too low or way too flat for the age and the hair loss severity. So that's going to make it more obvious that a surgery was performed, and that's permanent hair now. It's going to grow for the rest of your life mostly. So if you get the hairline too low, you know, when you get older, it's going to look unnatural and improper. And also if you get the hairline too low, it's going to limit the density that you can achieve throughout the rest of your head if you continue to lose hair loss behind that. A hair transplant quality is not always dependent on cost. It can just be dependent on economies around the world. In the United States, hair transplants are very expensive, and there are also just a lot of average and not so good clinics in America. So if you go have a hair transplant in the United States of America, make sure you're going to a very good quality clinic, because there's a lot of clinics that will charge a ton of money and still do a bad job. Whereas you can go overseas to Turkey and to other countries around the world, Thailand, and you can pay, you know, a lot less for hair transplants, and you can get a very good hair transplant done, or you could get a bad one done. So it's a lot of understanding proper hair transplant design. One common thing that can happen to a lot of people too is that they actually have a good hair transplant, a hair transplant that's performed well to high quality, but they don't want to take medication. They don't want to take the 5-alpha reductase inhibitor or use Minoxidil, and they have, you know, aggressive hair loss genes. So then they'll continue to lose hair behind the hair that was transplanted. Even if it was a good quality hair transplant, they'll continue to lose the hair behind that, leaving a gap in between the transplanted zone and the donor area. In that case, those people might just have to play catch up, and they might just have to keep going back for more and more hair transplants to fill those gaps, or they can try the medication route to save the existing hair behind that. It's just a risk you take. If you're not on medication and you get a hair transplant and you have decent hair loss genes, you should be prepared to continue losing hair behind that. So it's something that you need to be aware of before you go into this. All right, that's enough for this video. Great luck in your hair transplant endeavors. See you all later. Goodbye.